Okay, this is chapter 17. We're going to be talking about digestion. The main portion of the digestive system is a long tube called the alimentary canal, and the inside of the digestive tube is part of the outside world, meaning it is not the internal environment of the body. The pH, the electrolyte composition, and the water volume in the internal environment are carefully regulated, but the changes in the digestive tube is according to what we eat. Food material that enters the digestive tube is broken down into the building blocks, so sugars, amino acids, nucleotides, fatty acids, and glycerol. These building blocks are what is absorbed across the wall of the tube, and once they're absorbed, they're used to create molecules needed for our body. Digestion is the mechanism of breaking down food. We can either do it mechanically or chemically. Mechanical is breaking down large parts into smaller ones, but it does not change the chemical composition. Chemical digestion breaks down food particles by changing them into simpler chemicals. Your digestive system is organs of the digestive system. They will carry out mechanical and chemical digestion, as well as ingestion, propulsion, absorption, and defecation. And it primarily consists of the alimentary canal and accessory organs. The alimentary canal consists of organs that extend from the mouth to the anus. This is where food passes through. Accessory organs are the ones that consist of organs that empty secretions into the canal. Food does not pass through these organs. The alimentary canal is a muscular tube, and it's about 8 meters long, and it passes through both the thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities. The wall of the alimentary canal is composed of 4 layers. From the innermost layer, it is called the mucosa. This is a mucous membrane, so it will secrete mucus and help with absorption and breaking down food. The submucosa is a nourishing layer. It transports absorbed food molecules. Muscularis is the muscle layer, and this will move the tube and food materials. And the serosa is the outermost layer, where it's a serous fluid that will eliminate friction against the other organs. Here are some images of the wall of the small intestine, showing the 4 layers of the canal. Mucosa here in the large bracket, submucosa, muscularis, and then the bottom one is the serosa. From a microscopic viewpoint, here's the mucosa layer, the submucosa, the muscularis, and the serosa. There are 2 types of movement in the alimentary canal. There's a mixing movement and a propelling movement. The mixing movement is using muscles in small sections that contract rhythmically. This does not move materials in one direction. Propelling moves materials in one direction. And an example of that would be peristalsis. That is a ring of contractions that progress down the tube. It propels food particles down the track. In this picture, letter C, this is peristalsis, or propulsion, pushing it down the track. This one is more of a mixing, as well as this. Now, the alimentary canal is supplied or innervated by nerves, and the nerves of this tract are coming from the autonomic nervous system, and there's branches of the sympathetic and parasympathetic division. The submucosal and the myenteric plexuses are a group of nerves that will help with controlling secretions as well as motility of our GI tract. You won't be tested on these plexuses, but more importantly is to know how does sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system control affect the digestive activity. Parasympathetic is the primary controller for your digestion. It increases the activity of digestion. Remember when we learned the nervous system and we talked about sympathetic and parasympathetic? Sympathetic was fight and flight. Parasympathetic was rest and digest. So here we're talking about digestive system, so we really want the parasympathetics to be the one firing and working primarily so that your digestion continues. If you are in a, say you just finished eating something and you decide to go running immediately, that's not going to be helpful for your digestion because that's more of a sympathetic response. It will overpower the parasympathetic, and thus you won't digest well. So sympathetic impulses inhibit that digestive action. We're going to start at the mouth. That's the first part of your alimentary canal. This is where food is coming in, and that mechanical breakdown of solids is called mastication. It will mix with saliva, and this functions as an organ of speech and sensory reception. It's surrounded by lips, cheeks, tongue, and palate. It includes the oral cavity and the vestibule, which basically is that space in front of your lower teeth and your lip. The cheeks are the lateral walls of the mouth. They contain muscles for facial expression and chewing, and they have a lining of stratified squamous epithelium. The lips are a very mobile structure that surrounds the mouth. They have sensory receptors there to judge temperature and texture. They are a boundary between skin and mucosal membrane inside the mouth. The tongue. It's a very thick muscular organ that occupies the floor of the mouth and nearly fills the oral cavity when the mouth is closed. It's connected to the floor of the mouth by a piece of skin-like connection called the lingula frenulum. On the tongue, what we call taste buds are really papillae. They're the projection. Remember back in the sensory chapter, we looked at taste buds briefly. And then you also have tonsils in this area. On the back of the tongue, there is tonsils, and on the side, there is tonsils. We will look at tonsils again when we get to the immune system. I think, actually, no, we did talk a little bit about them in the immune system, but or maybe it's respiratory. I'm not sure, but basically, there's so much overlap. Here we have some on the side and some on the back. There's the tongue. Now the palate. The palate is the roof of our mouth. Part of it is bony and part of it is soft tissue. Off the back end, at the very end, is a part of soft tissue that hangs off called the uvula, and that's extending from the soft palate. That's there to help guide food down into your throat and not to go up into the nasal cavity. Again, more tonsils. We have palatine tonsils, pharyngeal tonsils. Those are going to be in the back of the tongue, the back of the throat, and clear up behind the nose. There's the palate and the uvula. Here are the tonsils, palatine, pharyngeal, and lingual. Teeth. They are our hardest structure in our body. You won't be tested on the numbers of how many teeth you have. Just know that they're the hardest structure. Gingiva is the kind of soft tissue, connective tissue that holds your teeth in and is surrounding your teeth. Salivary glands secrete saliva. It's important for moistening our food and binding it together. It will dissolve food so that it can be tasted. Saliva contains enzymes to begin our chemical digestion, and the primary product it's digesting in this point is carbohydrates, so sugars, starches. That's what's going to start being broken down by the enzymes in the saliva of the mouth. There are three major salivary organs, glands: the parotid, the sublingual, and the submandibular. The different pairs of salivary glands have varying portions of two types of secretory cells, serous and mucus. Remember, serous is a watery fluid, and in saliva, that watery fluid has an enzyme in it called amylase, which helps break down sugars. There's also a mucus cells that secrete mucus. This is for binding food and lubricating food while we swallow. The three main salivary glands are parotid, it's the biggest one, submandibular, which is under the mandible or the floor of the mouth, and sublingual, which is under the tongue. Here's a good picture of them. Parotid's kind of in front of the ear, sublingual under the tongue, and submandibular under the jaw. The pharynx is the cavity posterior to the mouth. It extends from the nasal cavity to the esophagus. The esophagus is a tubular organ that extends from the pharynx to the stomach. The pharynx and the esophagus do not help in food digestion. They're a passageway. Both the pharynx and the esophagus have muscular walls, which will help with swallowing, but not digestion. The pharynx connects the nasal and oral cavities and can be divided even further into three parts. The nasal pharynx is behind the nose, the oral pharynx is behind the mouth, and the laryngopharynx is down back behind the larynx. So on this picture, this is all pharynx. Here's the nasopharynx, the oral pharynx, and the laryngopharynx. As we put food in our mouth and chew it and break it down, it's going to be traveling down into the esophagus. Once it's in the esophagus, a peristaltic wave will start moving that food through the esophagus to the stomach. The esophagus is a muscular food passageway. It will penetrate the diaphragm through the esophageal hiatus, meaning the esophagus has to go straight through the diaphragm to get to the stomach. It contains mucus glands, and the lower esophageal or cardiac sphincter it's basically a ring of muscle at the end. It regulates how much food or how fast food is going to get into that stomach. Now, most pictures and models will show the esophagus like a tube. And it is, but it's more like a fire hose. It's kind of like flat in a way. And so it will take the shape of the food that travels down it. This is why you feel something sharp when you swallow it that hasn't been chewed well. Or taking a very large vitamin, you can feel it kind of go down your esophagus. Like from this view, it looks like it's a tube, but from this view, you can definitely see how flat it is. The stomach is a J-shaped pouch, and it's below the diaphragm. It's the upper left portion of the abdominal cavity. In it, there are folds of mucosa and submucosa called rugae. The stomach receives food from the esophagus. There it will mix with gastric juices, which are highly acidic. This is to help break down protein. There is very little absorption happening in the stomach. It is primarily breaking down the food more, along with your proteins, and moves it into the small intestine. Don't worry about the muscular layers of the stomach. It's basically, there's multiple layers of muscle to help with the contracting and squeezing of the food. There's what it looks like. These are the different muscle layers. The folds are the rugae. There's four main parts to the stomach. The top, where it enters from the esophagus, is the cardia. The top, very rounded top up here, is the fundus. The body is the middle. The pylorus is the end of it. You can see the lining of the stomach has big projections, and all these little cells, they will secrete gastric juices. Again, gastric enzymes are going to break down proteins. In this class, we won't test you on the names of the hormones or the enzymes. We just want you to know more the general function of the structures in the digestive tract. The stomach does not absorb some water or salts or certain lipid-soluble drugs, and it does absorb some water, some salts, some lipid-soluble drugs, and some alcohol. The mixing of food with the stomach and the gastric juices produces a semi-fluid paste called chyme. The peristaltic wave will then push chyme towards the pylorus, or the end of the stomach. A small amount of chyme is transported through the pyloric sphincter at a time. So the stomach will empty slowly. It won't just empty completely at once. When chyme starts to fill the duodenum, which is the next section, it will stretch some receptors. A reflex will be in place, and it will slow the emptying of the stomach. You don't need to know these details, but this is just kind of helping you understand how it slowly empties. The pancreas is an accessory organ to the digestive tract, and it's an endocrine gland which secretes insulin and glucagon, which help regulate blood glucose. It's also an exocrine gland because it exits the body. It's an exocrine gland, and its exocrine function is secreting digestive fluid called pancreatic juice. Here's your pancreas. It's kind of transverse in the way it lays in the abdomen. Now, the structure of the pancreas, there are many cells. I'm not going to test you on all the details of the pancreas. I just want you to know it secretes pancreatic juice, insulin, glucagon, but I'm kind of showing you just the general structure of it so you get an idea of how it looks and how it functions a little bit. So here it is, and right down the middle of it, it has this structure called the pancreatic duct. That pancreatic duct then empties into the small intestine, and this portion of the small intestine is called the duodenum or the duodenum. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I pronounce it duodenum, but it empties into the duodenum. And if we look at this square, this is the blown up version here. Here's your pancreatic duct, and it empties into it like a pore or a little opening, and it's protected by this little projections of mucosa. And there's also muscular control here, so that when those fluids are released, it can be kind of controlled on how much is dumped into the duodenum, how fast. So this pancreas is going to empty into the duodenum there. Pancreatic juices contain enzymes that digest carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. You may read through these different enzymes and juice components. What we will not test you on them. This just kind of gives you an idea of how regulation, again, this is negative feedback in a sense. We have, here is some acidic chyme coming from the stomach. This mucosa of the intestine will secrete a hormone into the bloodstream and stimulates then the pancreas to secrete its juices. The liver is your largest internal organ. It's located in the upper right abdominal quadrant, and it's just beneath your diaphragm. It is a reddish brown organ, and it is well supplied with blood vessels. There are 4 lobes to it. The right and the left are from the anterior view, and the right is the largest, the left is smaller. In the back or bottom part is the quadrate lobe. It's more near the gallbladder, and then the caudate lobe is inferior to the vena cava. Typically, when you learn basic structure of the liver, we look at just the right and the left lobe. Now you can see there's some ligament-like structure here that separates the lobes. It's called the falciform ligament. Those are your lobes. The liver lobes are divided into lobules. You can see they're they're divided into these lobes, and they have a central vein in them. There's a lot of blood flow that comes through here, and the main function here is to kind of get your blood flowing through here to clean it out in a way, filter it. And so you have central veins, but you also have a system called hepatic portal vein that runs through here. So oxygen-poor blood from the digestive tract is then transported to the liver through the hepatic portal vein. It mixes with oxygen-rich blood from the hepatic artery. This blood then filters through the hepatic sinusoids, which is these little structures within the lobules. And then hepatocytes, which is a liver cell, will adjust the nutrient concentrations. As the nutrients from the digestive tract flow by, bile is produced from the hepatocytes, leaves the liver through the bile ducts. So some important functions of our liver is it produces glycogen from glucose. It will break down glycogen into glucose. So it does both. It will either produce it or break it down. It will convert non-carbohydrates to glucose, and it will oxidize fatty acids. It synthesizes lipoproteins, phospholipids, and cholesterol. It converts excessive carbohydrates and proteins into fat. It forms urea. It synthesizes plasma proteins, converts some amino acids to other amino acids. It will store glycogen, iron, and vitamin A, D, and B12. It will phagocytize damaged red blood cells and foreign substances or antigens. It removes toxins such as alcohol and certain drugs from the blood, and it will act as a blood reservoir. Its role in digestion is to secrete bile. Bile is a yellowish-green fluid or liquid that the hepatic cells will continue to secrete. It consists of water, bile salts, which is produced from cholesterol, emulsified fats, and only bile component that have a digestive function, bile pigments, bilirubin, biliverdin, and this is derived from hemoglobin breakdown, cholesterol, and electrolytes. All of that is in the bile. The gallbladder is a pear-shaped sac on the inferior surface of the liver, and it will store and concentrate the bile that the liver has made. The cystic duct is a duct coming off the gallbladder, and it will connect with the common hepatic duct from the liver to form the common bile duct. The bile duct empties into the duodenum in that same pore that the pancreas is emptying from. The gallbladder can sometimes form gallstones, and the gallbladder normally concentrates those bile salts, the bile pigments, and cholesterol. Sometimes the cholesterol precipitates and forms a solid crystal. The crystals can enlarge, forming gallstones, and excessive bile concentration, too much cholesterol secretion by the liver, or inflammation of the gallbladder can cause this. This again is just showing us how it's communicated to the gallbladder with releasing bile. You won't be tested on that. Or the hormones. Should have deleted that one. Functions of bile salts. They aid in emulsification or breaking down fat globules into smaller ones. It aids in fat digestion by increasing the surface area. Bile salts also enhance absorption of fatty acids and cholesterol by forming smaller parts. They help absorb fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. And almost all the bile salts are recycled. The small intestine is a tubular organ that extends from the pyloric sphincter of the beginning to the beginning of the large intestine. It fills most of your abdominal cavity. It receives chyme from the stomach and liver and pancreatic secretions. It completes digestion of the nutrients in the chyme, and it absorbs products of digestion, transports the remaining residue to the large intestine. So most of your digestion, or absorption, is happening in your small intestine. The small intestine consists of three parts: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. The duodenum is the shortest, and it's a fixed portion of the small intestine. The jejunum is the middle portion. It's thicker and more active than the ileum, which is the distal portion, which contains lymph nodes in it called Peyer's patches. The jejunum and ileum are suspended by a double layered fold of peritoneum called a mesentery. This transports blood and lymphatic vessels and nerves to the wall of the intestine. The double fold of peritoneum is called the greater omentum. It drapes down over the stomach, over the large intestine, and folds of small intestine. This is the greater omentum in green and yellow on the left. There are tiny projections of mucosa called intestinal villi. They help increase the surface area of the intestine for absorption. In these little villi are a lymphatic capillary called a lacteal. The free surface of the epithelial cells contain microvilli, which also increases their surface area. And there are intestinal glands as well as circular folds of mucosa for more absorption. This is a picture of it. Here's another picture of a microvilli, and see the green lacteal coming up in there? It's for absorbing fats. This is a good picture. This is showing fat absorption. So as fatty acids result from fat digestion enter the epithelial cell, the fatty acids are used to synthesize fat in the endoplasmic reticulum. Then fat collects in clusters encased in protein to form chylomicrons. And then those chylomicrons leave the epithelial cell and enter the lacteal. Lymph in the lacteal transports chylomicrons away from the intestine to the blood. The small intestine carries on the following movements: peristalsis, which is that wave-like pushing movement that propels chyme in the proper direction down the small intestine, as well as segmentation, which is a ring-like contraction that moves chyme back and forth, which does a mixing motion. Parasympathetic impulses will stimulate both mixing and peristaltic movements, and sympathetic impulses will inhibit that. The small intestine becomes over-distended and irritated. When that happens, a strong peristaltic rush will happen, which is basically diarrhea. The ileocecal sphincter is this muscular ring connecting the small intestine to the large intestine. This helps regulate the flow of chyme again. The large intestine is named because the diameter is greater than that of the small intestine. It's about 1.5 meters long. At the distal end, it opens to the outside of the body through the anus. It absorbs some water and electrolytes, and it reabsorbs and recycles water and digestive secretions. It forms and stores feces as well. The parts of the large intestine are the cecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anal canal. The cecum is the start of it. It's a pouch. It forms at the beginning of the large intestine, and the appendix is attached here, which has lymphatic tissue in it. The colon is in different parts, but it's all connected, obviously, but as it goes from the cecum, it rises up the right side of the abdomen. That's the ascending colon. The transverse goes across under the rib cage, and then the descending is down the left side, and then at the bottom is the sigmoid portion. The rectum extends from the sigmoid colon to the anal canal, and the anal canal is about 2.5 to 4 centimeters long, and it opens to the outside as the anus. And at that end, there's an internal and external sphincters to help guard it. So here's our colon and large intestine. Here's the cecum, there's the appendix. Here's the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, and the sigmoid colon, the anal canal, and the anus. this picture, I'm not sure why the details didn't copy over, but these are microscopic slides of the large intestine. The reason I kept this on here is to show you the goblet cells. Look at all the mucus that's being produced in this part of the body. Again, the functions of the large intestine, there's really not much absorption or digestion happening here. It contains lots of goblet cells, so it secretes mucus. That's really its only significant secretion. It absorbs water, so about 90% of the water that enters it. There's intestinal flora here, which break down contents such as cellulose. It will also produce vitamin K and B12 and thiamine. Forms feces and carries out defecation. Movement of the large intestine are similar to those of the small intestine. They are slower and less frequent than those of the small intestine. And it does a mixing movement. Peristalsis is 2 to 3 times per day. Peristaltic waves will produce a strong mass movement, which follows most meals. And the defecation reflex is happening when the sphincters relax and you defecate. Feces is composed of materials that are not absorbed, contains water, electrolytes, mucus, bacteria, bile pigments, and some of the pungent order can be from bacterial compounds, including phenol, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, scatol, and indole. Over your lifespan, the digestive system starts to slow down, tooth enamel starts to get thin, teeth can get sensitive, gums may recede, or teeth may loosen or break. The GI tract becomes less efficient. Slowing peristalsis may lead to heartburn, gastric secretion slow, constipation may become more frequent, nutrient absorption decreases and including fat-soluble vitamins. An incident of lactose intolerance can increase, and accessory organs age, but typically not necessarily in the ways that affect health. And that is digestion.